image, the core image, to the object. And as I promised, Dirk, I will be heading over and doing the rest of the quick walkthrough in a live demo environment. Okay. In order to show you what you want to see, I'm also happy that if you guide me a little bit during, and just raise questions. Yeah.
Sorry, yes, Dominic. I was just wondering, but should we be recording this as well? Because
it's fine for me. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. So you should now see my browser. I'm using it in Chrome, in Google Chrome. I did already log in with my credentials. So whenever I log in back into the system, I will see the last items that I had been working on the left-hand side, and I'm brought back to the module where I left off last time, in this particular case, in the objects area. As I had shown before on the slide, the navigation between modules is located in the menu on top, and that obviously is then always clustered into certain topics. So you would have the collections management, having these modules available in the quick navigation menu. Everything regarding loans, exhibitions is then nicely structured and bundled in the quick access under that menu bar. So you would plan your exhibitions, you would be fine-tuning your exhibition through registrar module, establishing contracts, both incoming and outgoing, maybe be performing different collections activities, etc. With this rather limited time today, I would like to show you some core information about the system and the use of it. Dirk, can you see my screen? I'm using a 4K, or should I zoom in?
I can see it, but I don't know about others. I can see it.
Maybe zoom in a bit, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'm zooming in a little bit now. Should be a bit bigger. So first of all, of course, let's talk about metadata and information. So let me close my navigation for a second. So whenever we do have different type of information and data, you will of course find different categories in order to document your cultural heritage based on the different depth. And we do follow certain principles on how to document. So obviously you will find text fields, typical text fields to enter a longer description of a text, like free text and the likes. But there is also fields where you would require to document the data in a more structured and scientific way, for example, by relying on predefined vocabulary that is then nicely presented with a small drop down. That's also pretty self-explanatory. And then we have these structures where you would be capable to enter multiple information regarding one type of information. So for example, an object, of course, can have multiple artists, producers, or people assigned to it. So whenever you see this nice little plus structure, you can obviously have multiple people assigned to a object. So you would then be linking multiple artists, people, records with different role. To a certain item. So you can have multiple information nicely and tidy stored within one structure. Of course, always with the possibility to define how the relationship between these are. For example, this person collaborated in the production, and was the artist. Of course, that's not true, so I would undo my change. So whenever you see the structure here, you would be able to key in multiple data, either through relations within the system or through text with qualifiers. So you could, of course, have multiple titles. In this particular case, this Northern Norwegian piece had a Sami title as well as a untitled official title. So that's, of course, a concept that you would find again and again in order to have multiple date or period linked to it, multiple geographic references, classifications, etc. Of course, also dimensions would be a typical example of a multiple structure in order to store different dimensions within one nice and tidy aspect of the tool. Obviously, these are the basic information, let's say on a rather scientific, for a scientific user that really documents items in detail. And then in the tabs below, you would find other information that this user has access to. For example, the entire location history of that particular piece, the way it entered into the collection, so the acquisition, its provenance, if you do provenance research, then obviously references of the object to other modules, for example, references to exhibitions, to literature that you might have. We heard from Charlotte and Bonnefanten that they are having a number of literature as well within that they would document. So many of our museums obviously have, as well as a possibility to be part of groups. So all these tabs keep detailed information about the object and represent the documentation of the object in detail based on the Spectrum standard. Due to the amount of time, obviously I will not dive into each and every module and or data field, but I'm happy to grant you access to a demo instance or to a more longer demonstration with us if desired. Now, on the left-hand side, I will reopen my search and navigation. The moment that I want to navigate between items within MuseumPlus, I can perform a search. I did now a full text search on everything. So I would find all the 315 items that are in my demo instance, and then the search result is presented. But obviously you will always keep also one item at hand. So as soon as I click and point, I would obviously see the detailed information and keep track on my search. The free text search also allows me to start typing like port, and it would give auto suggestions like portrait or portrait. But I can also then do combination. So port and quent would both find all items that have port and quent somewhere in the field catalog. So this is actually the search and navigation that is used very, very often. But obviously, at some times, we would need to be able to search in more detail. And you can always do that and combine your full text search with a very elaborate advanced search. So you can then combine or choose to combine full text search with a advanced search where you would actually define what data field, for example, the subject, you would like to query, and then how And you could add a next query to your overall query. The good thing here is that it keeps track. So the different hits my different searches are doing gives me an idea why I end up with 1. So when I did the full text search or port and quent, I would find 9 hits. Combined with the field subject containing port has 4, but the combination between the full text and my advanced search through and would then result 1 total hit. So you wouldn't lose yourself in the course of searching, and you can then combine these at will. Very interesting, of course, you can also store away the query combination. We see that very often if people have to do recurring complex search requests to the system, that they would store them, and then they have the capability and the possibility to reuse this their searched filter. And the search can be saved for you personally or for a number of users. Now, the moment you would find something, obviously you can then step into the work of adding data, changing data, and the likes. And very important, obviously, is to keep a very detailed log of all changes applied to a certain object. So you can see here on the upper right corner, we could see that this record has not been modified for quite some time, more or less a year ago. It has been modified. And if I open the log, I would see the whole comprehensive log book on all changes performed on this record within my demo instance. And of course, as soon as I would start adding or changing or deleting information, I can still redo and undo, but the moment I would decide to save it, my logbook will get updated, and I can see that this has been removed. So we keep track on all changes that are performed on a particular piece. So no worry, you will always keep track on changes. Another core feature that I mentioned in my presentation before is the capability to have different views for different type of users. For example, I could be a scientific user now. I'm logged in as that, so I have full access to all the object metadata. I can visit all different modules that exist within the system, but certain users could, for example, only see very limited information, either through just a light box, if they would be read-only users, so they could perform a search on a more visual approach. And then when navigating into the item, me as a scientific user, I can see all the information, while some internal read-only users or other departments could then only see very high-level information. Now, these views can be configured during the project and or performed evolutively by using the extended administration package. When talking about view, obviously we want to see objects, let's say piece by piece, with different types of level of information, but very oftentimes our users also want to visualize a result in form of a table. And of course, if you first visualize it as a table, you would also be interested in changing the fields we showcase. So you can, of course, add or remove certain metadata fields in order to prepare an ad hoc view. And this ad hoc view can also be conveniently then exported into a Excel spreadsheet. So it would be like what you see is what you get table structure to export, or you can obviously also export information from MuseumPlus by using the export button. The export button would allow us to either export one or multiple records and into a whole range of different export definition. Now, the basic system comes with a selection of export templates, but obviously, as an administrator or as a super user, you will be able to create new templates, data sources, in order to grow your system after the go live. Now, Dirk, I know this a lot to digest, and there's only a very little amount of functionality I was able to showcase in that limited time. Do you have questions that I can maybe answer in the next few minutes before Magnus and the team would present their case study? Or would you like to join into a separate session with me that I could offer also to the other audience in future?
Well, for the moment, this is what I longed for, and in another time we'll contact you to have a more detailed information. So
Brilliant.
you'll hear from us.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I can also, as I mentioned, as a follow-up, when we send up the information, we will also send out the possibility to join into a more deep dive demo with us, of course. And whenever you feel like make use of it, you can book through Calendly. Okay. So thank you again, Dirk, for the extra attention. Great showing you the application, and I hope it was somewhat informative.
Well, thank you very much.
Now I would then go back to our main agenda. So let me share our program for the time being. So as I promised before the break, it would be the moment to introduce to you our colleague Magnus Bognerud from National Museum in Oslo. Magnus, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Hope you can hear me and see me.
Yes, loud and clear. So warm welcome to you, Magnus. I introduced you earlier this afternoon to the others, but I would, of course, give you the opportunity to introduce yourself and guide us through your case study today.
Thank you very much. So I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see it now?
Not yet.
Not yet. Let me see one more time.
Now it's starting to share.
Now it's
yes.
starting. Okay, that's good.
Brilliant. We can see it.
So yeah, my name is Magnus Bognerud, and I work as advisor for digital collection management at the National Museum in Norway, which is to keep track of or to facilitate how we document our collection and collection processes. So here today, I'd like to give you some insight into how we work with MuseumPlus, which is the tool we use for collection management at the Norwegian National Museum. And here we've just completed a period of large changes to the organization through the merging of several museums and also a relocation into a new museum building. So I'll briefly discuss why we decided to implement a new collection management system, at which was an already busy time for us. And I'll focus on how we work together with zetcom to design new parts of their existing product, MuseumPlus, and how it complied to our needs. But first, I'd like to show you just a brief video to make you all want to come to Oslo. I don't know if you see any changes to the image. At my view, it's just the one still image. Dominic.
Yes, unfortunately, I also had a still.
Okay, then just let's skip the promo video and continue on to our to my rest of my presentation. So in June this year, we opened this building, this museum, to the public, and it is now the largest art museum in the Nordic region. And here we have 13,000 square meters of exhibition space, 8,000 square meters of storage, and 3,000 square meters of workshops, etc. And here we present classical, modern art, architecture, design, arts and crafts, and contemporary art under one roof, and in over 90 exhibition rooms. So our vision is to put art at the center of things and create new agendas where culture plays a significant role in society. And of course, as a museum and a museum building dedicated solely to taking care of and displaying art for many centuries to come. And Norway's National Museum for Art, Architecture and Design, which is the official name, is the result of an amalgamation of the country's National Gallery, the National Museum of Decorative Arts, Arts and Crafts, and National Museum of Architecture, and Museum of Contemporary Art, and also subsequently its national touring exhibitions, and from a period of from 2003 to 2005, all these institutions were merged into one institution, which is now the National Museum. This was part of a large, wide-ranging reform in Norway's public museum sector. And in the process of merging the former museums, both physically into one building and organizational, many of our procedures had to change in order to embrace the new organization and the new building which was being constructed. And at the same time, as we started planning for the new museum, it was decided in 2015 that the collection management standard Spectrum would be implemented in Norwegian museums. And our existing CMS was not at that time Spectrum compliant, and in our view was not working as a complete collection management system. And in planning the move to the new building, a critical point was the safe movement of the collection, and the existing CMS did not have the technical solutions to solve this and did not have the possibility to plan and manage collection processes within the system. So it was decided to do a broad analysis of the museum's needs today and in the future to secure the best functionality and to procure and implement a new CMS. And after a thorough process, we chose MuseumPlus from zetcom. The National Museum's collections are complex. They consist of paintings, sculpture, drawings, decorative crafts, design objects, items of glass, leather, textiles, architectural models, and installation, and more. And over 100,000 of these works were to be relocated into the new museum building. And all of these had to be taken out of existing storage, checked and carefully packed, moved into the new building, and all of this during a pandemic, into new storage bays or into new exhibition spaces. And in our requirement list for the new CMS, some functionality related to transport was very specific, but others were not. And how could we turn these quite general requirements from museum staff into something that could help us in the big moving operation into the new museum, but also be applicable and useful in day-to-day operations after the move itself. So these are just some general thoughts, and then I think many of us have been wondering and struggling with this over time, and then why it's so difficult to combine museum software and storage or transport management. Both of these are established field with established actors, but we still seem to struggle with this. I'm not quite sure why that is. Maybe it's the complex subject matter, the documentation requirements that might be very specific for the museum sector, or is it the nature of the data we already have, or is it that the handling requirements are very different and much more specific to other types of logistical operations. But in our case, we tried to turn practice and what our somewhat uncertain needs into design. And we had two legacy systems with limited integration between them. We had one for cataloging and one for storage and transport. And locations, they could be changed in both, but were only synchronized once per day on manual command. And contextual information related to the works or related to transport events were only similar in one system and not the other. And of course, what we wanted was an integrated functionality for planning, barcoding, and transport in one system. And then what we then wanted was to combine the use of MuseumPlus with barcode scanning. We already had barcodes on a large part of our collection, so that's why we chose to continue with that instead of, for example, using QR codes or RFID. And then what we designed or planned was a solution in two parts, one for packing and one for moving itself. And then packing and preparing crates and loads, etc., were to be done in the accessory module, and the move itself would be done in the transport module. And location updates can also be done on the object level and in the accessory module itself. So this is just a simple conceptual sketch that we started off with. The idea is that an object could go into a crate, which could perhaps contain other objects, and that crate could go into another crate, and in another crate, etc., etc. And in the object module, we then have a simple field for location update. So then you could scan a location, and this object would then automatically be moved to that location. And then you also have a reference to an accessory which could then be packing material or a crate itself, and documented in the accessory module. And there you have a similar field to the one in the object module, where you can trigger a location change for this entire unit. And then all the objects within that unit, or of course, other crates or boxes that's in this unit would then be moved to the same location. And then in the transport module, we designed a 4-stage model. This was then particularly for moving into the new building, where we had transport stages or transports in 4 stages. One would be the footprint, where you assembled all the boxes and crates that would go into a transport. And then one would be the loading of the transport. And then on the other side, you had the unloading and then moving into temporary storage before the larger transport units were taken apart and moved into their specific locations. And here we just have an example of such a 4-stage transport record, where you can see the upcoming stages and of course metadata about this stage itself, and then all the containing transport units, the crates and boxes, and also if we have single objects that are not part of a larger packing unit. And then another feature that was especially important for us when choosing a new CMS and designing our version of MuseumPlus was conservation functionality. And in our previous system, we did not have functionality for conservation. So in our case, this was more or less designed from scratch by our conservators together with zetcom. And the way it works is that we have for all our objects a sort of a mirror record. So all objects also have a record in the conservation module, where we document all kinds of conservation requirements that are of a more static nature. That would mean that it doesn't necessarily change over time. And we also have a single record for each conservation report that are then linked to what we call a conservation overview record. And then there's also different views for different kinds of conservation reports and different fields, depending on what type of report it is and what type of object is being conserved or condition checked or treated. We also have an integrated IIIF compliant annotation tool, which is Mirador. And it must be said that a lot of our conservators still use Photoshop for annotation as well. And then we are also now exploring the option of using Articheck integrated with our existing functionality. And then we've also used MuseumPlus to plan and document the exhibitions in the new museum. And there, one compromise we had to make was how to make the exhibition module a planning tool for different groups within our organization. And then for the permanent exhibition in our new building, we had curators, conservators, art handlers that all had quite different needs. And as this was a big collaborative project with many participants. It was crucial to keep the source information in one place. And this was to prevent having to update information in different places with the risk of losing information, and that the work would stop if some parts of the process were delayed. But of course, as the curators and the registrars, for example, have somewhat contradictory use for the module. For instance, the curators, they have to provide or to create exhibition labels and lists for all objects, count pieces per artist or per object type. The registrars, on the other hand, and art handlers, they're more interested in knowing where each part of an object is located, where it must be moved, or if it has to undergo conservational work or taken for photo, and of course, finally, the exact location in the exhibition. So this list, or these lists of objects, could then actually be quite different for the two groups. So here's just an example of how we catalog our collection, and an example of when two different user groups may have different requirements. So this is a furniture set that belongs together and are a part of a larger whole. And in an art historical sense, it's one piece consisting of 3 parts. But for logistical purposes, this is 5 pieces. It's 2 chairs, 2 pillows, and 1 table. So in MuseumPlus, this item has 8 object records. The first one is the group as a whole, which we would refer to as the parent record. And then this record has 3 children representing the 2 chairs and the table. And then the 2 chairs again also represents the chair and the pillows. So the issue is then, when this item is planned for an exhibition, do we only include the parent record so that the curators can have a nice, tidy overview and treat it as a whole, and to create exhibition labels and keep track of objects moving in and out of the exhibition? Or do we also include all the physical parts that represent the works themselves? This would make it possible to keep track of all the workflows these parts must go through, such as conservation, photography, packing, and moving to the correct location within the exhibition. So if you only include the one part, it's much easier to get an overview of the exhibition. And you have good art historical documentation of the exhibition. But as part of a workflow that includes many different people around the museum that have to follow this and keep track of what's happening to all the different parts, it is important that all these are also included in the exhibition record. So that is what we ended up with. We included both the parent records and all the child records in the exhibition. So then all groups have been made aware of this, and so that they have to do some modification in their searches, for example, or when they do exporting for exhibition reports, labels, and the counting of the number of works that are in the different groups and in the permanent exhibition as a whole. And in this way, all parts of the items will have exact documentation of the route towards the exhibition through conservation, photography, and packing. And we'll also be able to keep track of when objects need replacement due to, for example, exposure time or other need for conservational treatment, or if some of them are going on loan to other exhibitions. So here's just an example of an exhibition room with complex objects. So this is a room dedicated to medieval religious art. And then here we also have such an example. This room is dedicated to the mid and late 18th century, at the time when Norway was under Danish rule, and the two countries had a flourishing economy, resulting in, amongst other, the opening of many factories in Norway, producing items in glass, porcelain, and iron. So in MuseumPlus, this room consists of around 700 items. So planning and documenting only in one room can be a huge task in itself. So then what we've done is create an exhibition record for every room in the permanent exhibition to keep track of the decisions, whether an object is in or out of the exhibition, moved to another room, or when in the future they might have to be removed for conservation needs or other purposes. And in some of the rooms, we also have several exhibition records, perhaps then related to display cases, for example, because of the high number of objects in one room. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Magnus, for your explanation. I can just you know, traveling back in time and traveling back when we met the first time for the procurement. Of course, we had seen that there has been put in a lot of thought on how to do aspects. But then when planning, and that was also what we heard earlier on, and going through the project, we had also seen some evolvement. And I think you guys challenged us a lot with all your preparations of ideas and workflow. And the questions you
webinar, maar ik ga ze wel even naar de printer sturen.
And the question you asked earlier on, why is it complex to combine workflow and documentation, is because, as you mentioned and as you had shown, there is actually a different need in everyday work of different people, but heavily influencing the data of the others. So they're both fully in need of up-to-date data, but on the other hand, they would just like to see a subset and be as flexible and as independent as possible. And there lies often the compromise. And I think we have learned a lot in these years since we first met until the big move. And I must say, congratulations on moving. I had the pleasure of visiting, and it was very, you know, you managed to put life into this huge building that you had shown, and it was quite amazing.
It's good to hear.
So it was a nice feeling when I had the opportunity to walk through the halls and see that it had been moved using our tool. But the end result, of course, is what made me smile. So thank you so much for sharing this insight. I'm sure we will have questions from the audience as well. So if you would agree, I would open up for the rest of the audience to raise questions and discuss. High complexity, and you managed to explain it as simple as you did.
Everything
so no
is crystal clear. But yeah, if anyone has a question afterwards, feel free to contact me, and then I'll reply as well as I can.
So we have Catherine asking in the chat, are the conservation records accessible to everyone within the museum?
They are accessible to everyone that has right access to the system.
So everyone who can alter data could also see conservation records. Is that or
yes?
Yes.
That is the general rule, but it's more maybe more dependent on their role. Everyone who has a need to see the conservation records can see the conservation records.
So Catherine, maybe try to understand the nature of your question. Would you want to reduce access or open access?
Yeah, I was just wondering whether there could be restricted access to certain piece of information, yeah, or whether it would be widely available, and is it very complex to give rights to a certain group of people regarding a certain set of data, I guess.
No, I would say no. We have, as a whole, we have access to the module itself. And then we also have different types of records in the conservation module. And some of them are treated as confidential, so then less users have access to those. And yeah, I would say it's quite easy to set up a scheme that makes sense for your organization.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yes, maybe just to add to this before we go to Joachim and Tosca. When it comes to the access rights, it's like in this building, so you could restrict Catherine users to have access to certain modules, so to speak. So they could, for example, not enter exhibition module and or object module. Within a certain, let's say, room, you could have subdomains, sub-collections. So I could, for example, see all collections, while Magnus and his team could only see architecture and crafts. And then even the next layer would be on field level. You could have certain fields within the MuseumPlus ecosystem that are in a higher confidentiality and would only be then assigned to certain roles or groups across subdomains and sub-collections and modules. And by that, I would say on these three axes, you can then steer the roles. And we typically would create roles and then assign those to users, and if needed, refine an individual user. So it could be that Dominic gets the role of conservator, but then you remove a certain aspect for this particular user if needed. So we can go very granular if needed, but usually we believe in having as much information flow as possible between.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
So then I would take the next question from the chat from Joachim. How does object and crate tracking work with your barcode system? Could you explain the workflow? So Magnus, do you want to answer?
Yep. So all objects have a barcode attached to them, and all crates and or boxes also have a barcode. So then if you're in the object module, you can update the location of an object. And if you're in the accessory module, you could, in the scan functionality, you could either scan objects, which are then put into that crate or packing unit. And then if you then scan a location, that unit is moved to that location. And if you scan another packing unit, that it will also then put into the unit you're already in, so that you can, for example, create a palette for moving purposes containing many different objects and boxes. And then in the transport module, you either scan single objects into a transport, or you scan the largest transport unit. So in this case, that would be the pallet, for example. And then when you move that pallet in the transport module, you also move everything that is on that pallet. And of course, the other objects or other packing units that are included in the transport.
Yes, and maybe to add in, Magnus, you moved many 100,000 items, if I recall correctly, in this big move into one new central storage, yes?
Yes, so we've moved about 100,000 items into the new building, but have also done moves across our other buildings as well.
Yeah.
So
Does
yeah,
that answer your question?
I hope that
Okay.
answered the question. It might be a bit abstract.
Seems that we got the thanks, so let's assume it is, and otherwise, again, we can also deep dive, and we also adopted a lot of that idea and functionality into the MuseumPlus standard configuration. Then we had a question from Tosca Philipson. How is the management of the CMS organized in your organization? I'm not 100% sure towards where this question aims. Is it management within team? So what teams do use the collection management? Maybe Tosca, if you give us some more context.
So yeah, I can give just a short answer. The system itself is managed by myself and a couple of other colleagues. So we manage how we use the system and which roles and access our other users have. And also we take care of new development within the system and contact with zetcom. And then, of course, we have an IT department as well that takes care of the sort of the technical aspect of managing the system. And in our instance of MuseumPlus, we have about 400 users. And then perhaps 100 or 150 of those have write access, and the rest have read access to the system.
Thank you, Magnus. And I can maybe just add in this particular case, with the national museums, we work in a hybrid hosting approach, meaning that the national museums do provide the platform upon which we do operation and monitoring of the system. And I think that was it's always a bit more challenging than the software as a service, where we would know and understand the environment to start with. But I could now say it was a smart thing to do. You have a strong relationship to that infrastructure vendor, and on the other hand, I think we really connected those dots well. But again, obviously, in the starting phase of a new system, and with the sheer amount of users, and also with a very large strain on moving and having a lot of moving pieces within the system, we would be lying if it wasn't at sometimes also challenging. And I want to be 100% transparent. It's always challenging to move from one system to the other. We have already learned that today with Charlotte. It also proved to be tricky to move from premise to another system, because it has had another data logic and approach. And then also the sheer amount of access did did sometimes put a lot of strain on the system. So I would really say it was a hard endeavor, but we really pulled off a quite nice and very comprehensive configuration at your end. We have another question, or maybe a follow-up question. How many key users? I'm not sure, Tosca, if that was already more or less answered. So about 100, you said, that have write access, and then other colleagues that are more read access to the system.
Yeah.
Yes. We had also Franz, who asked about the outgoing loan for your museum. So maybe you can elaborate a short little on that.
Yes, so the way we handle outgoing loans is across 4 modules, or maybe even 5 with the object module. We use the exhibition module and the loans module, or the contract module that it's often called. And in between those modules, there's a module called the registrar module, which handles data related to the individual records attached to the exhibitions and loans. And then we also use the collection activity module to document our loan committee meetings. So the way it works is when we get an application for loan, our registrars record the exhibition and the loan with the attached borrowers and time periods, etc., and the objects that are applied for, and then all the loans within a period are referenced in a collection activity record, where it's documented the outcome of the loan committee decisions. So which loans are accepted and which objects in the different applications have been accepted. And then once that is done, our registrars use the data within the loan module or contract module to generate the required documents, for example, the contract. And then they also use that as a basis for creating transport records and documenting insurance values, etc.
Thank you, Magnus. And there again, I would say is the exact nature of complexity that lies between different needs. So all stakeholders want to have up-to-date data, and they want to keep track on all the decisions and aspects happening at the same time. But on the other hand, sometimes these workflows, I'm not sure how it is at the National Museum, but at many of our customers, we can see that these workflows, even they don't always follow that 100% step-by-step procedure. There might be a question, there might be a change, some items might be removed, and this really requires the tool to be flexible and not too rigid, but on the other hand also cater for the typical processes again and again. And I think that's where that's a bit the secret sauce, to find a good balance between a rather rigid approach, but still leaving the users the flexibility to act flexible because they need to in real life. And that's maybe not only in loan, but it was in transport and conservation, in different aspects. The museums industry still has more complex and intricate processes at times with different impact on different departments. And that's also why these workflows aren't usually just like step by step in a waterfall, but they might go in not circles, but a bit more intricate ways. And that's not that easy to put into a system. So that's important for me to say. Maybe we have a follow-up regarding registrars. How many registrars are there with you, Magnus, working in the system?
For outgoing loans?
Potentially, I would say.
Okay, there we have 3 registrars working on outgoing loans.
Okay. So thank you so much, Franz, for the question, and thanks, Magnus, for your answer. Are there any follow-up questions or other questions to Magnus? Seems not. So again, Magnus, thank you so much for your presentation. Thank you so much for giving us an insight into what had happened before you guys opened in June. And again, I would recommend everyone, whenever you are in the area, give National Museum a visit. I think it's really worth it, and gives you a one-day insight into Norwegian history as well. If you start from the bottom to the top, I think you can walk from the Vikings to the modern. I did it. It took me many hours, and I still didn't visit all the 90 rooms. So I have to do another visit soon. So thank you so much, Magnus. It was really a pleasure hearing about.
Thank you.
Today.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. And if anyone has any questions or do want to reach out, just do so.
So on that note, based on our program, we would have reached the last case study. And I still wanted to open the room before we all have our well-deserved afternoon tea. And if there are any additional questions, then you can still take the mic. And I obviously also want to give a big thank you to all the participants today, the guest speakers, Charlotte, the Bonnefanten, the National Museums, our colleagues over at Fluxguide, and obviously all of you that participated today, and making this a really interactive session as well, with a lot of good questions. So big thank you to everyone for your time and interest. But again, if anyone has an urgent question, I would advise take it now. So again, I took 5 awkward seconds of quiet, and I would then conclude for today. Thank you very much. We will be sending out the presentations for you to read through, and also make additional information available upon request. And I'm sure you can also reach out to our guest speakers if you have additional questions. So thank you so much, everyone. It was an absolute pleasure. Have a very good day, a very good week ahead. Stay safe, and talk to you soon. Thank you so much.